Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm Tami Stackelhouse, fibromyalgia coach, author, and founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. The goal of this podcast is to empower you with access to the dream team of experts and coaches I've discovered are key to living the fibro life you love. From the comfort of your own home, and maybe even your pajamas, I'll help you take back control of your life and health. To help out with fibro fog, I always include full show notes and additional resources at fibromyalgiapodcast.com. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stackelhouse, and this is episode 180 and our next Ask the Coach, where I answer questions sent in by you, the listener. How do you actually know if your fibromyalgia is improving? Not just, I think I feel better, but a real confidence that things are changing for the better. This is a question that came in recently, and I knew I had to cover it here on the show as an Ask the Coach. We don't go from severely symptomatic to fibro-free overnight, right? Improvement with fibromyalgia can be subtle, and it does take time. It also means that it can be hard to see when improvement is happening. As a coach, one of the things I watch for in my clients are their fibro flares. Now, I don't watch for that moment when they are never ever fibro flaring again. Instead, I'm looking for your flares to become less severe, shorter, and farther apart. Another sign of progress might be not being as grouchy from the pain, or maybe canceling plans less often, or just having a little more energy for your family in the evening. In today's episode, I'm going to show you how to measure improvement, both on your own and with the tools that we use as coaches, so you can stop second-guessing yourself and clearly see what's working and what might need to be adjusted. As always, I do want to remind you that the information I'm sharing here today is not meant to be considered medical advice and should never replace consulting with your doctor, but instead give you a little bit of a reframe and maybe some new ideas to try. Sometimes you might feel better for a week or two, and then you have a flare and you feel like you're back at square one. I was literally just talking about this with our Alumni Association support group not even an hour ago. We were talking about the fact that it can feel like this, right? You do really, really well, and then boom, you have a flare, your symptoms worsen, and you feel like, did I even learn anything at all? But that's not what we're looking for when we're looking for improvement. Like I said a minute ago, I look for your flares. Number one, I'm looking, are your flares less severe? Meaning your pain and your fatigue don't go quite as high. So for example, maybe a flare for you used to mean your pain was super high, you were at an 8 or a 9. And now, maybe when you're in a flare, your pain is only a 7 or an 8. That is improvement. Number two, I look for your flares to be shorter. So instead of a flare lasting for a month, maybe now it only lasts for 2 weeks. And then number three, flares are farther apart. So instead of having a flare once a month, now it's every few months. Those are all improvements. So what can you do for yourself to track and see, are you improving or not? Now, I want to start this by saying you need to track daily. If you're not tracking your pain, your energy, if you're not tracking how you feel daily, you are just guessing. The reason for that is that our memory fails. If I were to ask you how you felt last week, or even last month, or how about 2 months ago, It might be a couple of months between times where we see our doctor. And so when they ask you, oh, how have you been doing for the last 2 months? I promise you, you are not giving accurate information unless you are writing it down every day. As people with fibromyalgia, our memory, we already know, is not perfect because of brain fog, because of stress, because our emotional bias. You might think that your pain is better on days that you're happy and worse on days that you're sad, but the reality might be exactly the opposite. The other thing with memory is that we remember the peaks or the valleys, but not the gradual changes, right? We might remember the very, very good days or the very, very bad days and not remember the middle. It might be a little fuzzy. So, what do we track and how do we track it? If we're going to have to do this daily, it's got to be simple. And I have made a symptom tracking log that I use with my students and my clients, and you can grab a free copy of it. All you have to do is go to today's show notes, which is fibromyalgiapodcast.com/180, and download the free symptom tracking log. That is with all of our other worksheets and handouts. You can just request access to that and we'll give all of them to you. If you're watching this on video, we'll actually put an image on the screen right now so you can see what our symptom tracking log looks like. You can see it's pretty simple. I've really only got 3 things for you to track every day. Number 1 is your energy levels, your fatigue. On a scale of 0 to 10, what would you say your fatigue is? So 10, super exhausted, I'm stuck in bed. 0, I don't have any fatigue, I can do what I want. The second line, that is going to be your pain levels. Again, 0 to 10, 10 being I am in the most pain I have ever felt, and 0 being no pain at all. This is our typical pain scale. Our imperfect, but typical pain scale. We got to start somewhere. So we're using 0 to 10 and knowing it's not going to be exactly perfect. The third line on the symptom tracking log is extra medications. Now, I do want to stress here, I'm talking about extra medications, right? Because there are medications you take every single day. Maybe you take one of the FDA-approved fibro meds every day. Maybe you take a pain medication every day. And then when you're having a flare, maybe you've got another set of medications that you can add to that. So maybe you only take extra pain medications when you're in a flare. Those you would make a note of on your symptom tracking log. You can also add to that, not just medications, I would put them on that same medication line, but you could also add various therapies you might use if you're in a flare. Like, for example, maybe you do an Epsom salt bath when you're in a flare and you don't most regular nights. You can keep track of that on there as well. Now, you'll notice when you see the symptom tracking log, those are very tiny little squares. And so you're not going to be able to write down the full name of all the medications. So I would recommend making yourself a little code down at the bottom. I used to use the first letter for most of the medications, right? So if I was taking an extra tramadol, I might put a T, or if I was taking an Epsom salt bath, I might use an E for Epsom salt or a B for bath and just put letters in there and then write down at the bottom of your sheet there what the letters mean, both for you, so you remember, but also for your doctor, because ultimately you are going to be giving this to them. My other recommendation here is that you fill this out at the same time every day. Now, there are reasons for this, multiple reasons for this. One is that our pain and our energy will fluctuate throughout the day. You might feel worse in the morning and feel better over the course of the day. You might wake up feeling pretty good and then feel worse right before you go to bed or wherever. I recommend that you choose the same time every day so that we are comparing same to same, right? We are comparing pounds to pounds, apples to apples. We're not comparing pounds to kilograms or apples to oranges, right? So same time every day, write down your numbers, jot in your letters. The other reason that we want to do it at the same time every day is for routines and habit building. You can actually program your brain to remember when to do things by creating it as a habit. I personally, when I was filling out a symptom tracking log every day, I don't anymore, but when I had a paper copy right in the drawer with my medications that I would take at night because my headaches, my pain, my fatigue was most likely to be worse at the end of the day. And so I had that log right there with the medications I would take right before I got into bed, and I would fill that out at the end of the night as part of my nighttime routine, right? Brush my teeth, fill out the pain log, take my meds, go to bed. And by doing it the same way every day, if you forget, you feel like you're missing something. What did I forget to do? Oh, it was my pain tracking log. So fill it out same time every day. I personally found it easiest to have a paper copy, and I had a pen clipped to it so I could just jot it down right there. And then it was easy to make a copy of that and give it to my doctor when I saw her next. Now, we do have this as a fillable PDF, so you can do this electronically if you want to, whatever is easiest for you. I actually started my pain tracking log way back in the early days of my fibromyalgia, and being able to fill out a PDF on, my phone or something was a whole lot harder to do. So I just used paper, but use whatever works for you. If you feel like you need to be tracking more, I'm speaking here to my data people, my perfectionists, my engineers. Often you will feel like, really, that's it? I'm just tracking my fatigue and my pain and my extra medications? That's not enough. Let me tell you why we do that. First and foremost, for so many people with fibromyalgia, if it takes more than a minute, more than a few seconds, let's be honest, and if it's too complicated, too hard to do, or too hard to figure out how to fill everything out, it's just not going to happen. We want to make this absolutely as simple as we can because it has to be done every single day. And for a lot of you, your pain, your brain fog, your fatigue, it's really that bad that it would be too hard if we had to keep track of what the weather was like and what you ate and, what time the sun went down and how many steps you walked and all the things. You would never do it. So we start with this. Now, I will say I have had clients and students occasionally where it was harder for them to do it simple. And if that's honestly you, go for it. However, there is such a thing as too much data for human brains to see trends. And if you find yourself struggling to track this daily with all the things you're tracking, that is your sign that you need to simplify. But for most of you who are listening right now, you're barely getting through the day. Adding one more thing might feel difficult, so let's make it easy, right? Just fill out 2 numbers every day and a couple of letters depending on if you took any extra medication. Now, as I said, there can be such a thing as too much data. What we are looking for with the symptom tracking log is trend lines. We're not looking for all the multitude of correlations. We're not looking for, if I eat this, how do I feel, and all the ingredients, right? We're just simply wanting to know, is what I'm doing helping me get better? Is the trend line improving? Or Is what I'm doing making me feel worse? And my trend line is going the wrong way. If we have a lot of data, that can actually be harder to see. So, what we're looking for, like I said, are trend lines. And what I mean by that is if you were to connect all the dots, right? If we were to plot it on a graph and we were, say, 10 pain is at the top, 0 pain is at the bottom, and we're putting a dot for every day where your pain is, and then we connect all those dots. Is that line going to be going down, or is that line going up, or is it going basically flat? That is a trend line. So over time, what we're looking for are things like maybe your average daily pain goes from a 7 to a 5, or your fatigue goes from an 8 to a 6. We are not looking for 0, not yet. Right now, we're just looking for better. Even 7 to a 6 is worth celebrating, right? Maybe your pain hasn't changed and your fatigue hasn't changed, but to maintain the same level of energy and the same level of pain, you don't have to take as many meds. Maybe your extra meds go from 3 times a week down to once a week or even once a month. Those are all measurable improvements. Now, I want to give you a guardrail here because especially our perfectionists and our data people and our engineers, I always include engineers because I'm married to one, tracking sometimes can create obsession. And we don't want that. We don't want you to obsess about your numbers. We don't want you to obsess about having to write every single thing down. We don't want you to micromanage your body. Tracking is about data so that we can know what's actually happening. It's about learning. It's about finding the truth and not letting our brains lie to us. And it's about eventually increasing your confidence. We measure things, we write it down, we collect data so that we can see what's actually happening. Like I said earlier, our memory, it lies. But numbers, especially when you write them down daily, when you know they're true, those numbers don't lie. And so when you can go back and you can look at your symptom tracking log, figure out what your average is for the month, and that number gets lower, that is measurable improvement that you can feel confident in. So remember to go out and grab your free symptom tracking log at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/180. Now, as you fill out your symptom tracking log, it will become like a mirror to you, showing you the truth of what's actually happening. You might think of a time where somebody saw you and thought, wow, you look really different. And you're like, really? I look just the same. When you see yourself in the mirror every single day, you don't notice the changes as much when they're gradual as someone who maybe hasn't seen you in years. So, as you do your tracking, use this to remind you. As you're tracking, look at last year versus this year. Look at last month versus this month. You can also do things like go look at old journals, maybe. If you write in a journal, you can look back and see, oh, wow, I don't think the same. I don't worry about the same thing. You can also ask the people that live with you, right? Your kids, your spouse. Do you think I'm getting better? Are you canceling plans less often? It is very common for other people to see our improvements or when we're getting worse before we actually do. Which leads me to the tools that we use as coaches, right? A coach can be another kind of a mirror to reflect things to you for how you're doing. Now, one of the things that we use as coaches, in addition to your symptom tracking log, is something called the Revised Fibromyalgia Impact Questionnaire, or the FIQR. Sometimes we just call it the FICR, right? So this is an official evaluation form that was created to measure fibromyalgia symptoms, basically. The Fibromyalgia Impact Questionnaire measures the impact of fibromyalgia on your life. So it's looking at things like your symptoms, your level of symptoms. It's looking at things like how well you function. And it's also looking at that mental health component of things. This form, the Fibromyalgia Impact Questionnaire, is used by many doctors, and it's also used in many fibromyalgia studies as a good way of seeing if various therapies work or not. As coaches, we always give this to our clients right at the beginning to get a baseline. We want a measurable starting point so that we know where you're at right now. You might feel like your fibro symptoms aren't so bad, and then you fill out the Fibromyalgia Impact Questionnaire and realize, oh, this is actually impacting me a lot. So the FICR can sometimes be a really good recalibration point. It also helps us know how you compare with other people with fibromyalgia. So, for instance, is your fibromyalgia pretty typical? Are you doing better than most? Are you doing worse than most? It helps us know how to approach things and what to recommend for you in your particular plan. Then we remeasure every so often. We do a new Fibromyalgia Impact Questionnaire. We have you fill out a new form every so often to see, are we improving or not? Now, if you were to look at clinical studies, like let's say a new fibromyalgia medication, they would use the FICR to measure the impact of fibromyalgia both before and after taking the medication. An improvement of 30%, 30, so cutting symptoms by about 1/3, would be considered clinically significant. Okay. Now, let me put that in real numbers that you will understand. 30% improvement would be taking your pain from a 7 down to a 5. So clinically significant doesn't mean taking it all the way down to a 1 or 2. Clinically significant is 1/3, little less than a third, 30%. So from a 7 to a 5, as an example. But having said that, of course, every improvement matters, even 1 or 2%. And when people follow a structured plan consistently, we will often see a 50 to 70% improvement in symptoms. With my own students, it is very common to see 50 to 70% improvement. And I look at all of this kind of like setting a GPS, right? So if you were traveling, let's say, to New York City, and you were to program that into your GPS so you could get directions, it is just as important to know where you are right now as it is to know where you're going. The directions to New York City from here in Seattle are very different than, let's say, directions to New York from Florida, right? I got to go east. Someone in Florida needs to go north. Very different, right? I go north, I end up in Canada. And pretty quickly, too. So knowing where you are, filling out that FICR form and seeing what your score is like setting that GPS and knowing where we are. These are actually the first few phases of my fibromyalgia wellness framework. First, we assess. We figure out exactly where you are, what your needs and your challenges are, and where it is that you want to go. The second phase is building that plan for you, that unique plan based on the information from our assessments, based on who you are, where you want to go. We don't guess. We measure, and then we create a specific plan to help you get where you want to go, just like the directions in your GPS. And Some of you, this doesn't happen so much anymore, but back in the day when GPS was still fairly new, you'd take a wrong turn and you'd hear rerouting. And then you take another turn, rerouting. And rerouting started to become a bad word, right? But that is perfectly normal. And it does happen with fibromyalgia too, right? We'll be following your GPS plan for your fibromyalgia wellness framework and come up with rerouting because we found something that needs to be adjusted. That is perfectly normal. I could actually do a whole podcast episode about what I've learned from my husband about GPS. He actually worked on the GPS for the Orion crew capsule for NASA. And I learned a lot sitting next to him as he would talk about his work. It is normal to have to adjust your trajectory. You are never going to go perfectly straight exactly from here to there, right? You're going to have to take turns. You're going to have to adjust. Things are going to bump you off course, and you have to get back on course. That is perfectly normal. It does not mean you're having a setback, okay? The other thing I want to make sure that you understand is what improvement doesn't mean. So if improving doesn't mean, okay, that's it, I'm done with fibromyalgia forever, right? You might get there someday. But at first, we're just looking for things to get better, right? We're looking for the direction that things are moving. Pain levels are on a downward trend. Energy is on an upward trend. Here are some of the mistakes that I see people commonly make as they start to feel better. Number one, they stop their medications and their treatments. They feel better, so they think, I don't need this anymore. Instead of making the connection, I feel better because I'm doing these things. Okay, so stopping medications and treatments, we do not do that just because you feel better. Number two, stopping or reducing coaching or other types of support, things like going to physical therapy, counseling, all of that. Same kind of thing like medications or treatments, right? Instead of looking at it like, I feel better, so I don't need this anymore, we need to look at it like, I feel better because I'm doing these things, and we need to keep doing them. The third mistake that I see people make all too often is they start feeling better, so they go back to their normal level of activity too quickly, or the level of activity they want to have too quickly, right? I feel better, so that means I can clean the whole garage in one day now. No, it does not. Remember, feeling better does not mean your fibromyalgia is cured. And just because your fibromyalgia isn't cured doesn't mean you can't feel better. Those don't connect at all. They are not equal. If something is helping you, whether it's a medication or working with a coach or going to physical therapy, that means it's working. It doesn't mean you don't need to do it. Also, did you know that word remission, you may have heard me talk about my doctor saying that my fibromyalgia is in remission and has been for many years. That word remission, it means that a disease is inactive or well controlled. Remission does not mean cured. So lupus, for example, people will often reach remission, meaning that their disease is inactive and well controlled, because they are taking the right medications to keep their inflammation down and to keep their labs stable, right? Which reminds me of something that my husband very wisely told me when I was trying to get my migraines under control. He looked at me one day and said, the goal isn't to not take medication. The goal is to feel better. His point was that I shouldn't try to use as little medication as possible, scraping by, right? Sometimes that's what we do when we see the words take as needed. We feel like we shouldn't need it, so we only take it if it's an absolute emergency. That's not what that means. Remember, the goal isn't to not take medication. The goal is to feel better. So his point was that I should use the medications that I had available to help manage my migraines and use them as necessary to feel my best, not as necessary to keep me from dying or keep me out of the ER, right? And I want to say that to you about your fibromyalgia too. The goal is not to not take medication. The goal is to feel better. And even if your fibromyalgia was in remission, you may still need those medications to get there and to stay there. My fibromyalgia is in remission, and there are medications I do still take. I don't take pain medications, really ever, but I do take my thyroid medications. I take my antidepressant. I take my low-dose naltrexone, which I know we need to do an episode on LDN, but that is the one fibromed that I do still take every day. Improvement means that we're getting stable, right? So when I talk about flares, flares are not as severe, they're farther apart, you recover faster, right? They're shorter. We're more stable. We're not necessarily never ever having a flare again. But we love a good before and after story, don't we? Right? Those dramatic house remodels on TV, the hair and the makeup makeovers, the before and after health stories. But they never show the long, boring part in between. The part where the house looks worse before it gets better. The part where you're making boring, healthy food choices when what you really want is a donut, right? The thing is, improvement is really boring in the middle of the story, right? We like the before and the after because of the dramatic change. But improvement is small, it's boring, and it's hard. Years and years ago, way, way before fibromyalgia, I was really struggling with some changes actually with my career at the time. And the coach I was working with taught me that the sticky middle, she called it the sticky middle, was like swimming across a lake, right? When you first start off, you feel like you're making progress because you can see you're swimming away from the shore. And when you get close to your goal, you can tell you're making progress because you're getting closer to the next shore. But in the middle, there is this point where you can't see either side, and you're swimming, and you're swimming, and you can't tell if you're making any progress at all. And you wonder if you're even ever going to make it. Maybe I should just turn around and go back. The impression is that you're working so hard and you're not getting anywhere, but you are. You just can't see it. And that's where we have to trust our GPS, right? Our data that we talked about. That's where we have to trust that to tell us if we're going in the right direction and if we're making progress. As your fibromyalgia gets better, you will still have pain. You will still have flares where everything feels worse. You will still have those moments where you wonder, did I forget everything that I've learned so far? Am I at square one again? But those flares should be less severe, shorter, farther apart. You are moving forward. And remember, we're looking at those trend lines, right? We're not looking for 0 on the scale. We're asking the question, is it moving in the right direction? And I'm sure at this point, most people have seen that little cartoon of what progress looks like. And it's not a straight line from here to there. It's got ups and downs and squiggles and backwards. And one version of the cartoon I've seen has like a lake in the middle with a boat. It's like, we're totally taking a stop right here, plateaus, right? It's not perfectly straight progress, right? So we have to look at that bigger picture. We have to step back and see our data, is it moving in the right direction? So you will know when you're improving, when your numbers show trends going in the right direction, when you need your extra medications less often, when your flares are shorter, farther apart, you recover faster. When that recovery speeds up, that recovery could be recovery from your flares, but I'm also talking just basic recovery. You get a cold, it doesn't last as long. That is also improvement because fibromyalgia makes all that stuff worse, right? And most importantly, you will know you're improving when your life starts to expand, even a little bit, instead of just shrinking smaller and smaller. Now, I do want to say a word here really quick because I bet there is at least one person listening to me right now, if you've even gotten this far into the episode, who's thinking, improvement? Are you kidding me? Yes, first of all, improvement with fibromyalgia is possible. Very, very, very possible. In the 10 years that I have been teaching students, teaching my classes, and in the almost 20 years that I have been a coach, I only have ever had one person who took their fibromyalgia impact questionnaire score and did not improve. One person. And we've talked about her recently. She has admitted that probably she has improved, and her first score was just a lot of denial. She also discovered that there are things beyond fibromyalgia that need to be addressed. So, yes, improving fibromyalgia is absolutely 100% possible. Getting to zero pain level, that depends on a lot of factors. I don't know if that's possible for you, but improving, yes, improving is possible. Now, if you're one of those people who hasn't found improvement for your fibromyalgia, it probably means you don't have the right help. And I don't say that with any sort of judgment. It's just simply, it is possible. And so if you haven't improved, something's missing. Right? I don't think you've necessarily done anything wrong or your doctor's necessarily doing anything wrong, because let's be honest here, our doctors do not get the level of training that they really need in order to improve fibromyalgia. Here in the United States, doctors get about 9 hours of pain management training. All pain management. That is not even fibromyalgia. That's not chronic pain. That is all pain, all kinds. 9 hours. Let me give you a comparison for that. I have spent nearly 20 years studying this. My certified fibromyalgia coaches end up with, it's over 200 ANCC continuing education contact hours compared to 9. There is a lot that can be done to improve fibromyalgia. So if you're not there, it might be time to add somebody new to your team who knows a little bit more. Now, if you don't know where your baseline is, or if you don't know what your numbers mean or how to interpret them, maybe you're just not a numbers person, right? If you want a structured plan instead of all this trial and error and feeling lost and overwhelmed with all the options, that is exactly what we do as certified fibromyalgia coaches. We are trained to look at your numbers, create a plan, help you simplify, and figure out how you're going to feel better. If you want to meet with a coach, you can schedule that online at findafibrocoach.com. Now, I've got this week's listener shout out for you. This comes from Carrie, who is in Oregon. Yay, Oregon. I miss you, Oregon. Carrie, who recently met with our coach, Lauren Vazano. And here's what Carrie said about her consultation. Lauren was great. I very much felt heard for the first time since I've been diagnosed. It made me hopeful. Thank you so much for sending that in, Carrie. I love hearing how our coaches are able to help and to give hope, because that is what we are all about. And for you listening, I want to just gently bring your attention to something that Carrie said, because it's easy to miss. She said she felt heard for the first time since her diagnosis. That matters, guys. When someone who understands fibromyalgia is looking at your real numbers, your real patterns, your real pain levels, and they're looking at it with you, things get so much clearer, so much more simple, and so much easier. You can stop guessing. You can stop wondering if you're moving forward and second guessing yourself. You get direction, and direction creates progress. Progress creates improvement. So if you are in that sticky middle, that middle of the lake where you don't know if you're making any progress or not, don't stay there alone. Schedule that consultation with me or with a certified fibromyalgia coach. We will assess where you are. We'll look at your numbers and we'll build a plan that will move you forward. That is how you stop second guessing and how you start creating real change. You do not have to keep blindly groping in the dark. There is a better way to do this. I will see you back here next time. And in the meantime, look for what's getting better, even if it's just a little better. And go get your symptom tracking log so you can start making notes and collecting your own data. See you next time. And that wraps up another episode of the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stackelhouse. For daily doses of hope, inspiration, and practical advice, come hang out with me on Facebook. Visit facebook.com/fibrocoach to find my personal coaching page and connect with me directly. To find the show notes, additional resources, or to schedule a consultation with me or one of my coaches, visit fibromyalgiapodcast.com.